Welcome back to the channel. Tune in or go stout. I hope you boys had a wonderful Christmas. I know I did. I spent it with family, spent it very calm, and I spent it remembering what the holiday is really about. I wanted to reflect on last year and what it taught me about this year and every year past my life. If you guys have learned anything about me on this channel, it's probably that I'm pretty introverted. I'm definitely not the type of person who likes the spotlight on myself. Hell, I even struggle to celebrate my own birthday. And not to get too bleak, but this always made me ponder my existence. I've avoided people and I've tried to stay out of the way, so I always wonder about the impact that I have on people. One of my favorite movies that covers this exact same topic and that I would watch very frequently, but I guess I didn't take away the most important lessons and apply them to my life till about last year, is the movie A Wonderful Life. If you've watched it, you know that that movie talks heavily about suicide and the impact of the holidays and money and a whole bunch of things that are pretty prevalent today. And while I've always been the kind of person to turn to movies to learn life lessons, because I feel like art describes so much that we can't really, put into words. Last year, I had a first-hand experience of feeling everything that movie was about, but in my own personal life. One of the most annoying things about living in the area that I live in is the HOA community that we have. And it's no surprise that somebody with a loud car who drives at any hour of the night pisses off their HOA. And piss them off I did for several years actually. This kind of hit a boiling point in 2022 after several months of getting notices from the HOA to put a new exhaust on my car, or that it was too loud, or that I was waking them up when I was going to work at 6 a.m. the butt crack of dawn. And well, they got tired of leaving notes and just gave me a court order, or I guess a threat of a court order, that if I didn't fix the exhaust, they were gonna take me to court for a noise violation. And me, being the stubborn, hard-headed 25-year-old I was at the time, was more than prepared to take it to court, where I would have certainly lost, because that's usually how these HOA troubles go. But by the blessing of God, my neighbors decided to just talk to us. The HOA in my community is made up of very old people who have owned their homes since the 1980s, when this community was born. And one of the founding members of the neighborhood took a second out to just approach us and have a real conversation, because they felt like this problem was escalating to a point that it didn't need to. We were all communicating via mail and email and never word of mouth. So one day they finally invited us over to talk, and when me and my sister stepped in that house, the amount of shame that overcame me was so crazy. I walked in thinking that I was gonna have some heated discussion or a talk about how we were being inconsiderate, but when I opened the door and saw a 70-year-old lady with Parkinson's and her caretaker, which was her best friend for over 50 years, with the most inviting smiles ever, I felt bad. I let a beef with the HOA management lady turn into me disrupting the peace of a lady in the end stage of her life, to be frank. And even with how inconsiderate I was being, she was nothing but nice and warm to me. Quickly, the conversation went from the actual problem of the exhaust to just talking about life stories. We talked about childhoods, we talked about the traveling that we all did, and at the end of the conversation we left wondering if we even talked about the exhaust at all. But we knew that we had an agreement that we were going to fix it, and we were going to make it a goal to talk and communicate more. And from that point on, me and my sister made it a duty to communicate and check on our neighbors at least once a week. I grew closer to the caretaker, her best friend. The guy's name was Dan, and my sister grew closer to Elaine. And through Dan, I learned a lot about both of them. I learned that Dan was an Appalachian man. He was a down south, eat possum, kill a squirrel type guy who found his way to the city doing carpentry. He faced a long battle with drugs, had a lot of issues with his family, and somehow ran into Elaine through a family friend. And since then, he's just been living there, helping take care of her and making the house more suitable for her as somebody who lives with Parkinson's. And I learned that Elaine was a very savvy businesswoman who worked hard most of her life, and even though she couldn't have certain joys in life like kids, she did have a lot of love for traveling and people. Dan, even through all the trials and tribulations he's went through, found a lot of solace being able to take care of somebody who was willing to open their doors to someone so broken. And he made sure to make this point known to me. He would say things like, "Without Elaine, I'm nothing," repeatedly telling me that without her, there probably wouldn't be a lot of meaning, and he would have probably been slumped out in some street doing what he was doing on the path that he was on before he met her. And the more that I talked to them both, the more I talked to Dan, the more that my sister communicated with Elaine, and the time that we would see them, it kind of spread to the entire neighborhood. We talked to other members of the neighborhood and asked them about Elaine, and the same story was always being told. She's the pillar of our community. She's been the nicest best woman here. She's a mentor for all the women in the neighborhood, and she's done more than people could ever thank her for. And while this was no surprise, once you saw the energy of this lady, it all made sense. But the thing that was surprising was she again had Parkinson's. She was confined to her house. She had to use a stair lift to get up, and she could even do basic things by herself. She even suffered from drop head syndrome, and she was always constantly looking at the floor because the muscles in her neck were too weak to support her. I say all this to say that a woman with so many cards stacked up against her was the most bright spirit you would ever run into, and she had the most childlike spirit you would ever see. I remember one time she had a bunch of sugar-free popsicles, and she's not allowed to eat sweets in her age and condition, and she said, you know, I would have tore this whole box up, but I thought you and your sister would want them, and she gave the popsicles over to us. I'm not a fan of sugar-free popsicles, but those popsicles were special. They tasted sugar-filled. They were happy. I don't know how to explain it, but her energy radiated through everything. And the same thing went for Dan. This man had been fixing the same truck that was in his driveway for at least 5 years. Every time I talked to him or asked to help, he said, nah, needs a new engine. And when he got the new engine, nah, needs a new pump here. And it was a very old Chevrolet truck. I don't think he ever actually wanted to fix it. He just liked working on it, spending time, being able to take care of her, and also feel like he was progressing in something. But I've never seen that level of devotion in anything in my life. And fast forward from the start of our relationship at 2022 with those neighbors to 2024, around my birthday, we got some news, not really good news either. Elaine had gotten sick, and there wasn't much they could do for her at the house, so she had to go to the nursing home. It was an elderly care center where she would have around the clock watch to make sure she got better, and for the few weeks she was there, she was getting better. Most of her symptoms were starting to tone down, and they were even thinking about letting her go back home soon. In this time of her being at the care center, Dan took it upon himself to redo the entire bathroom that they had, changing the tile, installing a brand new walk-in bathtub, all as a gift for the holiday season that was coming up. It was around October, and man was he working hard. In between making the trips daily to see her, he would be spending the entire day fixing up that bathroom, buying parts and supplies that he needed, and anytime you asked if you could help, he would say, no, I have to do this by myself. This was a determined man, and mind you, he was like 60 years old doing this. That man was a superhero, but it's weird how everything lined up. At that time in my life, especially around that birthday, my 27th birthday, I hate to get so bleak, but I really thought it was time to join the 27 club, as they say. And no, don't worry, I'm not one that really would ever do that, but I felt like I was at the end of my road. The whole year was not really going in my favor. I was feeling a lot of conflict with my career path and what I should even do career-wise, and I just couldn't shake that feeling off my back. I just felt like I wasn't doing much career-wise, life-wise, relationships-wise, and the yearly frustration I felt on my birthday, trying somehow to avoid the entire day altogether while people around me were wishing me nothing but happy birthday wishes when I felt furthest from happy at that point. But I got past my birthday, and I was waiting for the holidays because I knew that same feeling that I was feeling on my birthday would return as the year ended, because to me, Christmas and Thanksgiving and all these different holidays really are a show of what you've done. And when you feel inside yourself that you haven't done a lot, the Christmas spirit or the holiday cheer you're supposed to feel really turns into dread. While everyone is going over accomplishments and things that they want or all the stories that they shared, you just sit there wondering what you did, feeling less successful because you don't have the same amount of accomplishments or gifts as everybody does, and you forget what it really means to be grateful. Well, not too long after my birthday, got probably some of the worst news I could have ever expected. It wasn't even on my bingo board. I just assumed that everything would play out well, but on October 25th of last year, we found out that Elaine passed away. And I remember that day vividly because it was never so cold in Georgia that early, and I never stared at another house for more than I did that day ever in my life. I remember looking up to the second floor window where I would always see the light on because that was her room, and the light was still on. As the days passed and as family came down to get ready for the preparations for the funeral, that light stayed on and it never went off. And as we talked to Dan and tried to comfort him and see what we could do to help, he invited us to the service. This was a really weird thing because I knew that we were going to go. There was no doubt in my mind that we were going to go and pay our respects, but I've never ever been to a funeral before. That's not to say I've never had a family member that's passed away, but with half my family being in the States and the other half being in my original country, I've just never been to a funeral. And that day came around. It was on Tuesday. And I remember it said the service started at at 10, but we showed up at 8, and we weren't the only ones there. Everybody was there at 8. And while there were tears, there was also stories and recounts of how great of a woman she actually was. She spent her life outside of business, singing in the church choir, helping national youth groups, being a church school teacher, and being one of the main reasons people even attended the church that she went to. While I only knew this amazing woman for 2 years, when I stepped for that service, it felt like I knew her a lifetime. It felt like I was a member of her church for a lifetime. And as the service started to happen, I was in disbelief the entire time. Death was something that I've never thought about. I've never really had to think about it. When you're young, everyone around you is young. My mother was not too old, so I never worried about old health or health conditions taking her out. God bless that it never has. And I'm the oldest child, so every other sibling or cousin that I have is around my age or a little bit younger. But in that very moment, I just learned how mortal that we actually are. We live every day like tomorrow is guaranteed, but really it's not. We live on borrowed time, but we act like we can keep refilling up the meter or that we're just going to respond somehow. And as the service continued, and as tears were wept, as people walked past the casket giving condolences, and as the service wrapped up, Dan tapped me on the shoulder and let me know, hey, you're going to be a pallbearer today. Do you think you can handle that? Mind you, I was a mess. I had a tear streaming down my eye. I was already in disbelief by the entire service, just how beautiful everything was. But he said she would really love if you did this. You and your sister really made a lasting impact on her. And even though I felt undeserving and very underprepared, I leaped at the opportunity. I remember everybody in the church clearing out a pathway for all the bearers to get their corner of the casket and walk it down the aisle. I remember standing shoulder to shoulder with Dan and helping him walk down the aisle as much as he was helping me. I didn't realize it, but this whole symphony of a service tied back to everything I was feeling. I never really understood the importance of life or impact that people carry. I've never really had any of that impact taken from my life and seen the hole that it's left, but seeing the pain on Dan's face, even though he was trying to keep high spirits for everybody around them to make them feel better, I could tell it was weighing on him. And as we took each step getting closer to the hearse, the reality of the situation felt like it sank in deeper and deeper with each step. But after what felt like a lifetime walking from the church doors to the hearse, we put the casket on the rails and watched as it was slowly pushed into the hearse, saying our goodbyes silently to ourselves in our head, taking in the moment for what it was. It was the end of a life, but it was the birth of so much spirits around us. The amount of impact this woman had on her community was profound, to say the least. And while the funeral service ended, we had to go make a 2-hour drive to the middle of nowhere to a monastery in Georgia to continue the burial part of the service. And this is where the crowd got way smaller. A lot of the people that showed up for the funeral service couldn't make the 2-hour drive to the burial service. And by the time we got there, all the traffic and the headaches that we were dealing with getting everybody there on time, it ended up being a handful of like 20 people, I would say. It was me, my mother, and my sister, along with Dan's family, and some other churchgoers that were able to make the trip. And I've never really met Dan's family up until this point. I knew he had a daughter who had kids, and he would always talk about them, but then we finally got to meet, and I saw the same wild energy that Dan always talked about passed on to his whole lineage. And as we were cracking jokes, waiting for the burial service to start, Dan pulled me to the side and he says, when I met Elaine, I didn't know what family was. I was even thinking about abandoning my own family. He spoke about the pressure the world put on his shoulders and how he felt like he never could actually show love because all the love that he received was attached to something, whether it was his skills or what he could provide or what he could do. And meeting Elaine at the lowest part of his life where he had nothing to offer but a pair of hands and watchful eyes to keep her safe in case anything happened showed him that love didn't have to be attached to anything and that it could grow just from a hope. As I said before, Dan wasn't her husband. He wasn't her boyfriend. They had a strictly platonic relationship and were something akin to SpongeBob and Patrick, two young spirits that just happened to cross paths and become the best of friends. And by the amount of devotion Dan had for Elaine, you would think that they were married. We would always joke that they were. This man planted an entire garden with exotic flowers just so Elaine would have something beautiful to stare out when she was stuck inside the house. Like when she knew she couldn't eat cookies or treats because of her Parkinson's and how much of a choking hazard that was, but she would always take every opportunity she could to try. And every time it ended the same way, Dan was there to hand her a glass of water and help her get back to a regular state. Two people who devoted their lives to each other because they found that the kindness in the world was hard to see in everything else. The money that one acquired didn't bring them happiness, and even with the shortcomings that life presented to Elaine, Dan helped fill every void that she would have ever possibly felt by being present, being attentive, and being there when no one else was willing to. And while all these things could have led them both to be bitter, hostile, and closed off to everything around them, it did the exact opposite. All the hard times they went through and the shortcomings they felt in life led them to open the door even more, hoping to pass on a message of care and impact anybody's life in a positive way to maybe change how that person's life would go. And while this was the core of their relationship, I never knew how far it went. And it really hit home when he pulled me to the side and flat out just said, my daughter probably wouldn't have a father if I never crossed paths with Elaine. I was lost for words. I remember giving Dan a big hug after he said that, and then returning to conversate amongst our own families. And once the burial procedure started, I remember scooping a handful of dirt, saying my closest prayer that I could, and throwing that dirt on the casket as a goodbye. All this was so new to me, and the fear that I thought I was gonna feel experiencing death so close for the first time was overshadowed by something. I still don't know what that something was. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was certainty that life does get better or it does change, but it was a feeling I never felt and would never forget. As the casket was lowering into the grave and the final prayer was being said, the amount of tears cried collectively amongst the group that we were in was immense. All the guys trying to be tough, try not to show the pain on their faces, just to give in to sorrow and grief. It was a dark moment for sure, but it was beautiful. Once the last pile of dirt was thrown on top, the casket fully lowered, and the shovels put away, that was the end of that moment. But that didn't mean we left. So many people sat there in silence, no words said, but so much communicated to each other. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. The tears ran dry, the air hit your face colder than anything else possibly could, and then we realized we can't sleep in the graveyard. No matter how much we may want to, that's not our time, that's not our place, and that's not what our calling is. I thought I would be the one telling Dan to hurry home, but he was the one to tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, he said, our families have long drives to make and we're only making them way longer. So after saying our goodbyes, giving our hugs, and telling everyone else to be safe, we all headed home. Dan went with his family for the night and I went with my family. We arrived home, we talked about everything that happened and the effects and asked if everyone was okay and how everyone was dealing with it. And we tucked in for that night, but I had to make sure and look out my window one more time, and the light in the second floor of that house was still on. The same room that I always saw for several years, but I only known for 2 really great ones. I would love to say this is where the story gets better and all the healing and everything happened in a second, but the healing didn't really happen until I saw the impact of Dan's life after the fact. With Elaine passing so close to the holidays, I always wondered how Dan would handle it. He kept a straight face up, but this is a man who grew up in the mountains, had to fight for everything he had, and had to make survival when that seemed like it was impossible. So of course the face that he showed you was one of courage and of nonchalantness, but I know deep down losing his best friend in life must have been an impact that I could not even feel. So me and my family made it a mission to check on him almost every day, bring him little treats to make it worth going on, and support him in his mission to complete that bathroom he started working on but never got to finish for her. Even with all the coming change that was hitting his life, losing his best friend, having to sell the house because he just couldn't live in a place with so many memories, I'll never forget how much a can of Coca-Cola would make a man smile. And that's all he really wanted. I asked, hey Dan, what do you want? He said, I just want a Coke, man. Just want to drink a soda. And I offered him to bring him breakfast and coffee, and he said, what do I look like? A city slicker? I just need a Coke, and if you could get me some grits, that would be more than enough. So I did. I showed up. I helped him do yard sales. I helped him do everything that he was planning on doing anyway. And as each day passed and we got closer to Thanksgiving, I remember not worrying about myself or the struggles that I was facing during my birthday or the hopelessness that I felt running through my veins, and just making sure that I could help Dan make it through. And up until about 4 days before Thanksgiving, I remember thinking that I was helping him, but in reality, he was helping me in more ways than he actually knew. I remember dreading the holidays. I didn't want to sit at the table and see Thanksgiving pass by or see Christmas pass by because I viewed it from a selfish lens. I didn't do much. I felt like I'm not accomplishing what I should. I feel down, but I didn't take it for what it was. I was lucky enough to have a happy and healthy family that was able to gather around at the table. Even if we didn't accomplish everything that we wanted that year, we were still able to recap with each other and wish for a better one next year. And everybody tells you, be grateful. But when you see somebody lose their world, it really puts everything into perspective. I saw Dan experience Thanksgiving alone. I saw him go through the hardest Christmas of his life. And even after all that, he was still cracking jokes with me every single day leading up to those moments. If you made it this far, you're probably wondering, what's the point of this video? Bro's been yapping for 20 something minutes now. But if you take anything away from this video, I hope it's how sweet Elaine was or how great Dan was, but also how bad my character was when I met them. 2024 and that hopeless feeling I had running through my veins didn't just happen. Even though Elaine and Dan made an impact the second that I met them and had a relationship with them in 2022, the selfish characteristics that I was carrying around were hard to shake off, and they really didn't shake off. The reason my 2024 was so bad was because I was so selfish. Everything that I was viewing was from a lens of I, even though all the things that made me dread that time of the year were also actions that I did. And once I was able to step back and look at the grand scheme of everything going on, I realized, hey, it doesn't matter that much. I can find a new job, I can find value in myself, and I can attempt to do something different. But if I kept up the negative mindset that I had, viewing everything through a lens of myself and not the community around me, I would have probably made decisions that I regret heavily. I was beyond short-sighted, and while it's very hard to see the bright side of anything, especially death, Elaine made it so easy. Even with how sudden everything happened, she took every chance she had to make sure that she went out the way that she wanted to. She scheduled her own confession, she finalized her will, and she said all the goodbyes she could before that day came. And knowing that she went out not fighting the end but accepting it and making the most of those moments made it hurt a little less when we did everything. And being in the position to help Dan move on and start the new chapter of his life helped me grow in ways that I never thought possible, and I think really broke the bad streak that I was having for several years and helped me make decisions that I thought I would never make. Again, I would have never left my job and made this YouTube channel if it wasn't for that lady. And for everybody wondering what happened to Dan, he got through the holiday season, sold the house, and moved north with his daughter. He still goes to see Elaine, and you still might catch him in the area sometimes, but he was able to move on and find new happiness and enjoy the life that he was able to create even when life threw him a curveball. And hey, if life is throwing you a curveball right now, I promise you it won't always be like that. I can't tell you when or what's gonna make that impact on you, but every dog has its day. It took me several years to get out of the funk that I was in and find a peace of mind that helped me become a better person overall. As I say, it took death to make me appreciate life. I'm not wishing that on anybody. It was hard, and this wasn't even someone who was my blood family. This was just the sweetest old lady I could have ever possibly asked to meet. And I choose to carry on that same spirit that she had in my everyday life because that's the only way you can actually live. With everything going on economically and how bad the financial state of a lot of people our age is, it takes the first-hand account of hearing somebody who had parents that lived through World War II, lived through all the crashes, and faced a lot of tribulations themselves to show you that there's so much more to life than this monetary nonsense that we focus on every single day. And I know that seems like a big thing to grasp, and it might not feel true at the moment, but trust me, it is. And like I say every video, find community, find people to be around, and cherish the family that you have. Because once this all stops, once the money stops mattering, once the precious metals don't even hold value, all we have is the people around us. And in such a selfish world, go against the grain and show humanity to your neighbor. You never know whose life you could be saving. But again, what do I know? I'm just an unemployed guy playing Call of Duty, sharing my opinion. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you for listening to what I had to say. I wanted to drop this earlier, but schedule, holidays, so I'm getting it out now. And don't worry, we'll be talking about all the economic stuff, and I'll still be giving you my predictions for next year, but that'll come at a different time. For now, enjoy the year with the people around you. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time.
Take another day.